Hi, I'm Angus Gillespie, your host for East Brunswick Television. I'm here today with Rik Palieri, well-known folk musician and singer. Rik grew up here in East Brunswick, New Jersey, listening to stories and songs around his mother's kitchen table. He fell in love with music at a young age. He now performs traditional songs on a variety of instruments, including the banjo, the guitar, and the Polish bagpipe. He's a world traveler, having appeared at music festivals all over the world, including every state in the United States. His most recent book is Banjo Man, Adventures of an American Folk Singer. And it's my pleasure to welcome Rik to our studio today. Rik, can you tell us about your very first book, The Road is My Mistress? I think you published that back in 2003. Yeah.
Well, Angus, I'll tell you, it was a little bit crazy because first of all, I never considered myself a writer. I didn't even like to write. I wouldn't carry a pencil with me until Pete Seeger wrote me a letter. And he said, Rik, it's important that you keep a journal. You have to write things down. So I started writing a journal, and then every once in a while a magazine, a small magazine, a music magazine might want a story. Then they'd ask me to do it, so I'd write it down. And people were kind of very generous that they liked the way that I was writing things. And a friend who was an old hobo, he was a hobo, and I met him in a hobo jungle. And he goes, Rik, I'm going to help you write a book.
Wow.
And I said, you're going to help me write a book? He said, yeah. He says, I've done it for some of these old hobos. I can do it for you. Now, what he did for the old hobos was maybe 25 pages, a little thing, a handout thing.
Like a pamphlet.
Like a pamphlet. Well, when he told me that he was going to write a book, I really went to town and I started sending him all the things that I've written. And his computer was getting jammed with things. He goes, Rik, this is not just this is a real book. And I said, yeah. And that's how we started doing it. We worked together. I kept sending them the files. I didn't know what I was doing. He had these Frankenstein computers that he kind of salvaged, and they corrupted files, and so we were sending files back and forth, and sometimes they're not working. And we got to the point I wasn't sure it was ever going to get done. But I was writing to Pete Seeger at the time because, Pete has been my mentor, was my mentor most of my life, about 40 years. And he started giving me ideas about this. He liked the idea that I was writing a book. And he said that, he started talking about his own book, how to play the 5-string banjo. And he said that he wrote that book when he was working with the Wallace campaign, the Henry Wallace campaign. I think it was back in 1948. And he was writing this book and then mimeographing. Remember the mimeographs?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He was mimeographing copies in the hotel rooms and selling them for $2 a piece, self-published.
Wow.
And that's how his book started. So he was encouraging me. He said, don't wait for somebody to give you the green light to do something. If you have an idea, go ahead and do it.
Wow.
So that's how it all started out. And I first published that with Trafford, which is a small kind of self-publishing outfit. And then a woman who was more book savvy, she helped me get it to the next level where it was on Amazon. And it was selling on Amazon. And then it was in the real book market. And, started doing the book talks and things like that. And that was the intro into the book world for me. It's basically like a fluke. I didn't really expect, like most people say, I'm going to write a book, right? How many people have you heard that said, I'm going to write a book?
Yeah. Well, we call such people aspiring writers, but it's different from the writers who sit down and do it.
It's a lot harder than people think, but not impossible.
Yeah, it's fatiguing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, for all of you people who have this dream, what is the most important thing that we always have to have is an editor. We have to have somebody to try to find the zillion mistakes that you don't see. When you're trying to go through that draft and you're going over it and over and over, and you're sending it to friends, you still need other people. You know, Angus, I've realized that typos are like kittens. You know how you have a bunch of kittens and they get loose around the house and you think that you've rounded them all up? Well, there's the one hiding underneath the bed that you didn't see.
Yeah. So moving along, what inspired you to write the next book, Banjo Man? That came out recently. Just 3 years ago, 2020.
Yeah, the Banjo Man is the answer to the first book. So it has some of the stories from the first book. But you know, at the time that I published the first book, in I think it was 2023, I think it was.
2003.
No, 2003, excuse me, 2003. And
20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I was just at the beginning of the journey where everything was lining up to do the work. Okay, so I met the people, I started doing the concerts, I was starting to do the tours, but it really not had come to this, to where I am today. And the mentors that I had, they had all passed away. And I wanted to be able to thank them. I wanted to be able to make the story go full circle. And so, you know, in the beginning of Banjo Man, you see the early roots here in East Brunswick of learning how to play the music and putting on little hoot nannies. And the first time that I played at a real folk festival was at the New Jersey Folk Festival, and that was 1978.
Wow.
And it's amazing that you know, it all started from this dream that I was talking about, being a young kid in high school and going
in East Brunswick.
In East Brunswick High School, right here, folks, and going I played hooky, as one does. Pete Seeger was playing over at Douglas College in the chapel.
Yeah, I was there.
I went to that concert. And it's going to sound funny, but I'm going to tell you folks the real thing. I was sitting there and I watched Pete Seeger on the stage, and I watched the way that he put his hand out and the whole audience sang. And my body filled up with light, with a bright, bright white light. And I felt this change, and I heard this in my mind. I said, this is what I'm going to do with my life.
Wow.
And I went backstage. Remember, Pete had a little meet and greet after the concert. And I went back there. And at that time, my hair was really, really long, about down to here. So I was able to slip into the college without anybody knowing I was a young kid. And I was back there, and Pete was having a petition. He had a petition to sign against the Vietnam War. It had people, there was all the women there, and there were little babies there, you know, and Pete was talking to everybody. And I stumbled up to him and I said, Mr. Seeger, why do you like the banjo? And he smiled and he looked at me and goes, because I like the tone. And that meant the world to me, that he talked to me like a regular human being. I was just a young kid. I was only 15 years old. And, you know, and he talked to me, and that was the beginning, you know, of writing letters and doing all kinds of things that eventually brought Pete and I working together for many years. And it's funny to think about that, you know, that experience at Douglas. And now, this weekend, going back to Douglas, to the Folk Festival, probably within earshot of where the chapel is, right?
Oh, that's right.
And so talk about going full circle. So I wanted to, you know, the book to talk about those early roots, and then, you know, kind of going along and working with the different mentors that I had: Utah Phillips, Sis Cunningham, Jimmy Driftwood, you know, those are all, people that I learned from. They all had significant lessons to teach me. And I was like a little sponge at, just listen. I love to listen. I love to listen to people tell stories. And so I would listen to them tell their stories. And, Sis Cunningham, she was an original member of the Almanac Singers with Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie. She was the first one that I met that was really from the old folk crowd. That was really an important person. She was also the chief editor of Broadside magazine, where Bob Dylan published, and Phil Oakes. And I went to see her one time. A friend brought me over there. This is a funny story. I went there, and it's in The Road Is My Mistress in that first book, and I'm talking with her, and we're laughing. We're talking about Woody Guthrie, and we're talking about the Dust Bowl, and I was talking about the Almanac Singers, because I always had a fascination for the Almanac Singers. So she took out her old accordion, right, that she played with the Almanacs, and I was playing the banjo, and she's playing her accordion, and this dust is coming out of the bellows of the accordion, filling up the room, and she's laughing. She says, "That's Oklahoma red dirt."
Wow. Great story. I want to change gears a little bit. And what would you say to our viewers out there who might be thinking about writing their own memoir? What advice would you give them?
I think that the first thing is that to realize that it's a journey. It's not something that is going to happen right away. The other thing is that you have to be really mindful about the stories that you write. There has to be a reason for the story. I mean, you might think that it's a good story, but if it doesn't have, either I would always look at it that a story had to be educational, where somebody would learn something from it. It would have to be entertaining, It would have to be sort of a life lesson in there, or it has to be something sentimental. It has to be something that can touch someone's heart about a family member. So those were the things that I was thinking about when I was writing stories. And so a lot of the stories that you think that oh, this is a great story, no, that ain't going to work. I know that you've written a lot too, Angus, so I know that you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. It's a funny thing. Sometimes when you have a familiar story that you've told over and over again to your friends, and you're writing that up, you're on a hot streak. You can really go. And there's other times when there's kind of a transition and you don't quite know what to do, and you have to sort of put it aside for a while.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've noticed is, even when you're on a hot streak, after a couple of hours, you get very tired. It's amazingly fatiguing. It's not physical work, but it's still exhausting.
Well, you have to have the time to do it. And
Well, that's a question. How did you find the time?
In a sad way. What happened was I was writing all these things. I was thinking about writing the book, and I was slowly getting it together. And my grandmother's house in Hillside, New Jersey, my Polish grandmother caught on fire, and my parents were there at the time, and my mother got severely burned in the fire. And we didn't know if she was going to live or she was going to die. And so I had to put everything on hold. Okay, I didn't take any, because I didn't know what was going to happen. She was in the hospital. So I wrote from day to day to day, full days, because I didn't know what else to do. And I felt like this is what I need to do.
And did you get tired after writing for a while?
Well, I think that the whole thing is there was a story inside me that I felt compelled to tell. I mean, it wasn't like there was ever a time when I was doing that, the first book, where, I wasn't just, it was all just coming out.
Gushing out.
Yeah, it's just gushing out. Banjo Man, on the other hand, was a little bit, there was a lot more real concentrated work because I was trying to fill in gaps. I was also trying to, like I said, honor these mentors and tell those stories in there. Because I think it's so important that we do this. That, you know, some people are well known, okay? Some people like Pete or Woody, you know, but like the guy who taught me, you know, the Native American flute, Kevin Locke, he's known in certain areas, but not in every area. The people who taught me the Polish bagpipes, they're not known at all. But everyone was important. Everyone is important. You know, that we all have our own story to tell. We all have our place that fits into this big puzzle of life.
Were you working from an outline?
Yes and no. I mean, later at the end of the project, Banjo Man, yes, I was definitely trying to figure out like where it was going to go and how it was going to end.
Yeah.
And I really, and the big tour that I did, the Almanac, the celebration of the Almanac Singers, that's a big thing. That was a really special project. And so I knew that had to be near the end of it.
It sounds like you weren't really writing this in chronological order. You were writing bursts of things, remembering incidents, and you arranged them in chronological order later.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was writing things, and some things I had written, you know, in my journal. You know, I had just had a story in my journal. So I went back. My wife is a hand bookbinder. So she makes me these journals that are like ledgers, like that, and they're all. That's why I did this book like this, to look like the kind of journals that I write in. Except my journals are much bigger. And so I write every day. I start my day in what I call my book of dreams, which is just a journal. And I write down my thoughts.
Wow.
And so then I referred to that for. Where are the details of a particular story? What was I doing and who did I meet? And then I was able to fill in some of the things in that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've been struggling with the memoir, and I've been trying to write it in chronological order. And it's difficult because I never kept a journal. I now wish I had, but but I do have my appointment books, which give me kind of a hint. But I guess what I next wanted to ask you is, what did you learn from writing this book? What was the takeaway?
Well, the takeaway from Banjo Man, especially, I didn't really see it until, I was writing it in the pandemic. Remember, because it came out in 2020.
There was nothing else to do.
Once again, there's nothing else to do. And also, I didn't know if that life would return.
Yeah.
And I was writing this book for all, I think about the young people today, and I think about the freedom that we enjoyed we weren't tethered to a cell phone. We weren't, people didn't have to know exactly where we were. We take our thumb, stick it out on the highway, and we go for an adventure. And, there's a certain sadness that I have that part of life is pretty much disappeared.
Yeah, we do too much email and too much time on the computer.
Too much time on the computer, not living, And that's what I saw from my book is I said, Rick, you've lived an interesting life. You did what you wanted to do. You were with the people. You found the source. That's what I did, Angus, is I looked for the source to find the music. I wasn't just looking at a songbook trying to figure out the songs. I did that too, like anyone else. But I went out and found if there was a living person that was connected to that song. I went and I visited, I talked with Leadbelly's family.
Wow.
I spent a little bit of time with Alan Lomax. I mean, there's just so many people. This is even before, starting to do the TV show.
Yeah.
So all of these things keep adding up and adding up to provide you with more opportunities to learn.
Yeah. What did you enjoy most about the creative process?
About the creative process. Oh, I think living the stories. That's what I enjoyed most. That was,
Living is more fun than writing.
Oh
about it.
yeah. I mean, and that's what I was trying to get I mean, you probably remember the story that I wrote being in the hobo jungle in Pennsylvania, and the hobo King Frog. That he escaped from the hospital. They brought him in on a piece of cardboard in the back of a station wagon car. And we brought him inside. We were in a boxcar on a railroad siding. And they lifted Frog and they put him inside the boxcar. And then they put train lanterns all around him. And all the hobos were there, the kings and the queens of hobos, and all the musicians. And we're playing a special concert of songs for Frog, the hobo king, who can't walk anymore. He's laying down on the piece of cardboard. Now, it brings you right to that moment.
Yeah, you remember it clearly.
Really, and that's what I was trying to convey in writing it, to bring people into this world that they have no idea, no experience with.
Follow-up question. What did you enjoy least about the creative process?
Oh, yeah, spelling. I'm not, like I said, I never wanted to be an author. I didn't, that was not my plan. I was resistant.
That's why you needed an editor.
I needed an editor, and I still, when I write, it's not an easy thing. Yeah. It's a hard thing for me to do, to sit down and write. But the story moves you along, and it makes you want to tell that story. So it's worth going through all the processes that you have to do in order to do that. And like you said, if you find the right editor, and in my case, Tim Brooks, Vermont, he's originally from England. He wrote a great book called A Hell of a Place to Lose a Cow that I read before I met him. And I wrote to him and told him that I really enjoyed this book, but he never wrote back. But later on, he was writing a book about American guitars, a very well-known book that he wrote. And they had interviewed me in that book. And so he reached out to me. And then I told him how much I loved his book. And we started having what we call coffee time. Maybe once in a month, we would sit down at a coffee shop and we would talk about the work that we're doing, what he was writing, what I was writing. And I was talking about, I was writing this book and I was having some different friends help. And he goes, "I'll help you, Rick. I want to help you."
Wow.
And he just jumped right in. And he was the one who was telling me the importance of, you may think that this is a good story, but does it really fit this book? What we're interested here is about the music and the travel. That's the main thing. So, your personal stories aren't as important in this book. Okay? I mean, there is a lot of my personal background in there, but there's not, we made sure that it didn't really delve into too much of that.
Well, since music is the focus, tell us a little bit more about your very first banjo.
It's right here.
Wow.
This is it. This is my first banjo. What happened was I was learning from Pete Seeger's How to Play the 5-String Banjo book, because after I saw him in concert, I really wanted to learn. And I had some, what we would call, musical failures young in life.
Of course.
Where you're trying to play an instrument and it didn't work. So my mom was used to that idea. So when I talked about getting a banjo, she said no. She said no banjo. And so I did what industrious kids do, is I saved up my lunch money. And I didn't eat for a long time. And any chore money, any birthday money, nobody knew I had my secret banjo fund going on. And then one day, I saw an ad in a newspaper that there was a used banjo for sale. And it was a long neck banjo, like this one here. Now, Pete Seeger played more like a Vega, like this one.
Yeah.
And it has two different types of tone rings in it. This has a Gibson Master Tone ring in it.
And it has mother of pearl there.
Oh yeah, well it kind of changed as I went through life. You know, it doesn't look anything like what it started out to be. This is a one of a kind kind of banjo. So this was originally a Gibson RB 180 from the 1960s, and so I was $50 short from it, and I had to confess to my mom that I stopped eating. And so she gave me the $50, and I was able to buy my banjo. So this banjo's been with me ever since I was, I started playing. And the reason that we talked about the idea, well, okay, Rick, well, why have a long neck banjo? What's the difference between this banjo and ordinary banjos? Well, an ordinary banjo, you see where we call this a capo.
Yeah.
It stops here. That's where an ordinary banjo would be.
Yes.
So Pete Seeger back in I think it was around 48 again. It was back in, he wanted to sing a song, and he didn't have the bass notes. He wanted to sing in B flat. He wanted to play it in a C minor position, and so he got this idea: just add a few frets onto my banjo and make it longer. Now, if you look back into history, the old African minstrel banjos, old banjos, they had longer necks and they were tuned lower. Now, maybe Pete had this in the back of his mind, but he went to D'Angelico, the famous guitar maker in New York City, and he told him this crazy idea that he had about, can we saw this neck over here and then we'll add a few frets on. And so that's what he did. And that became the real symbol of Pete, was this long neck banjo. And it's a singer's banjo. That's why he did it, so he could sing. So here we are, and we're in G, but if I capo it down to here, I'll be in F. And if I take the capo off, I'll be in E. So all of a sudden, you can sing a song in so many more keys. And so like groups like the Kingston Trio and all the folk revival people, they were using these long neck banjos so that they could sing in a lot of different keys. And that's sort of the importance. It's not just to have these, aesthetically. I mean, of course, when you're a young 15-year-old kid and you're enamored of a performer, you want to have an instrument like them. But as I grew, I realized the importance of what these frets can do in a musical performance.
Well, that's very interesting about how your music has led to your memoir. Can you share with our viewers, how can they get a hold of a copy of this book?
Well, I'm an old-fashioned guy. There are so many complaints that people have been talking about the big Amazon.
Yeah.
That I decided that I would self-publish my book. And and I explain this to you too. The reason is because you have control. That's what I learned from Utah Phillips. Utah Phillips said to me, own your own tools. Be in control of your life. If you have a publisher, you might get some royalties, but they might decide that, we're not going to publish this book anymore, and you've lost your book. So the idea of having the control over, you own the book. Okay, you have to pay for it. Everybody has to pay for it one way or the other. And so, and then I invite people to come to my website, which is RikPalieri.com, rikpalieri.com. And there you can find out the information about my book and my CDs. I made about 14 CDs throughout my life, and all other kinds of stuff about my TV show. You could read all more things than you need to know about Polish bagpipes.
Well, I want to thank you for coming out to our show today, and we've learned so much about your book. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Angus. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to be here at the East Brunswick television station, right here where I grew up.